Hello friends and welcome back to Generation Pixel Land. If you're new to the channel, well, you picked a great day to pop along because it's the next episode of the A to ZX of the Spectrum. That's right, where I play this old boy up here and we put it through its paces for a selection of games. And this week, well, it's episode 21, so that's the letter U. So if you're interested to see what comes up in the letter U in the ZX Spectrum, then you just wait until after these titles. First up for the letter U, we're going to have the Ultimate Combat mission from Mastertronic in 1987. Now straight off the bat, we're going to be looking at the bad game this week because this game truly is quite bad. Now Mastertronic added dimension games tended to be budget games, but budget didn't always mean bad, but in this case, well, it meant bad. As you can see from the gameplay footage, what we're looking at here is a run and gun game. The only problem is, or at least the only problem in the ZX Spectrum, it wasn't so much run and gun as wade through treacle and gun. Other issues I had with this game, well, it was the range of your weapon. It barely made it one of those blocks in front of you before it petered out into nothing. Now of course this also meant that enemies had limited range, but I would have much rather had enemies who could shoot directly at me from distance and me straight back at them. Now other than the speed and the range of the weapons, there was another issue. There was a jump button. And I'll be frankly honest, during my gameplay I have no idea what that jump button is for, what purpose it possibly serves. Yes, of course you can see there's gaps in the playing area, but they're far too long for you to jump over. And can you jump over enemy fire or enemy sprites? Well, no you can't, so why is it there? Now don't get me wrong, back in the day this game, especially being a two-player game, would have killed some time with you and your buddy on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, but that's about it. Fortunately, being a budget game, it would only have cost you a couple of pounds, so you would have missed out going to the cinema or perhaps to the local swimming baths to pick up this game and give it its chance, but it wouldn't have had the chance the next weekend, let me tell you that. So no, definitely not. If you come across Ultimate Combat Mission, then well, just avoid this one unless you're absolutely hardcore into collecting for the ZX Spectrum. And of course, if there's any C64 fans watching this and they had a version of this as well, did it run just as badly on there? Well, let me know in the comments as always. So no, I'm not recommending this game this week. In fact, I'd quite happily fire it into the sun myself. And that is the Ultimate Combat Mission from Mastertronic's Added Dimension in 1987. The second game for the letter U, we're going to look at Underworld, released in 1984 and from Ultimate. Play the game. Now we all know who Ultimate eventually morphed into, and that was Rare. So for all you Nintendo and Xbox fans who, well, have pretty much had the best of Rare over the last couple of decades, this little ZX Spectrum game is where they started. Now the game itself is quite simple. It's a platforming game and the end goal of the game is simply to find and destroy the Guardians so you can escape the Underworld. Now as I said, it's simple gameplay, well sort of, because this is where Ultimate, or should I say Rare, come into play for their quality of gameplay. Your hero sprite is Saberman. You probably remember him from Saber Wolf, but if not, he's your archetypal English adventurer from the 1800s, sometimes armed with his fabled sabre and of course his trusty pith helmet. Now as you'll notice from the gameplay, I'm taking no care whatsoever when it comes to enemy sprites, and the reason for that is that enemy sprites don't kill you. Because in this game the enemy sprite has only one job, and that's to try and make you fall to your death. So when you touch an enemy sprite, all it does is knock you back or through the air, and let me tell you, the physics in this game are absolutely divine. Well, divine if you like extremely tough gameplay, that is. Because although the sprites themselves won't kill you, if you fall from a distance it's just a bit too high, well that's where you lose one of your 7 lives. And another notable and fun feature of this game is the bubbles. You will have noticed it. On occasion bubbles do pop up from the ground and float upwards. Well of course you can stand in these bubbles to try and get higher up the level. Of course it comes with a price, the price of course being that the enemy sprites will definitely try and knock you off that to your death. so you have to jump to another ledge just for a bit of safety, or if you're really brave that is, just like Saberman, jump onto another bubble. And as I said at the beginning, the point of the game is to defeat the exit guardians, which you'll need a special weapon to do, whether it be the torch or the saber, and these are found during the exploration of the caverns. But what makes it truly tough is there's almost 600 pages to this game, 597 different screens that you have to navigate your way through to get to these, well, final bosses. And would I recommend you playing Underworld today in 2021? Well, absolutely, it's a masterpiece. It comes from Ultimate Play the Game, who became Rare, one of the most important developers of, well, just about all time, despite the fact that Microsoft seems to have killed them off by now. So find a way to play this game, because it truly is not only a masterpiece but a very important game when it comes to the history of video games, and that is Underworld from Ultimate Play the Game in 1984. Third up for the letter U, we're going to have a look at Universal Hero, released by Mastertronic in 1986. No doubt looking at this gameplay you've probably seen it all before, and well, that was pretty much the case with Universal Hero. Because let me tell you, bandwagon games, they're not a modern phenomenon. Throughout the history of video games, if there was a successful game, well, there would be a slew of other games riding that bandwagon alongside. Now that didn't mean they were necessarily bad, and Universal Hero is one of the better examples of the, well, let's call them arcade adventure games that were prevalent in the 1980s. Now of course it is very similar to games like Nighttime and the Dizzy franchise, but at the very least this game wasn't one of the lazy bandwagon games. A lot of attention to detail in the graphics and of course the jetpack mechanic were two of the outstanding features of this game, and on top of that it had an absolute boatload of pop culture references that injected the much needed humour into these games. As for the game's story, well, it's simple and concise. Who has to repair his space freighter which is out of control and on course to destroy both Bert and his chances to get home to Earth. To do so, like with all of these adventure games, you had to find the right items and use them in the right place. Simple tried and tested gameplay mechanics that, well, could captivate you if there was enough attention to detail and graphics, as there was in this game, and of course in gameplay. Now as I mentioned before, this style of game is very popular in the 80s, especially the mid 80s. You would be extremely hard pushed to find anyone with a collection of 8-bit microcomputer games that didn't at least have 2 or 3 examples of this style of game. But the big question, can I recommend anyone picking this game up now? Well, absolutely yes, and the reason for that is the big hitters in this genre, the Dizzy franchise or the Magic Knight franchise, everyone from back in the day played and loved those games. So of course there's no doubt that this is a very popular genre, but why just limit yourself to the bigger hitters of the past? You should certainly have a look about and explore some of the other examples in the genre. And this particular game, well, let's just call it a hidden gem. Though to be fair, if you come from outside the United Kingdom and you're under the age of 30, every Spectrum game is probably a hidden gem. So yes, if you get the opportunity, pop out there, get yourself a copy of this game, and that is Universal Hero from Mastertronic in 1986. For game number 4 in the letter U, let's take a look at Ocean Software's The Untouchables from 1989. And yes, it's an Ocean game, and it's a licensed game based on the Kevin Costner movie of the same name. Now we all know licensed games weren't always the best, but when it came to Ocean Software they did manage to pull a few decent licensed games out of the hat. See for example Cobra. But did they manage to pull off the same magic for The Untouchables? Well, no and yes. Video games are very rarely black and white, really good or really bad, but tend to have some sort of middle ground, and with The Untouchables, well, this was certainly one of those licensed games in the grey area. As you can see from the gameplay, it's a side-scrolling platformer shoot 'em up, which again for Ocean Software was something that they had a great deal of experience in. The issues I had with The Untouchables, however, was the level of difficulty, and mainly due to the sheer volume of enemy sprites that was thrown at you right from the get-go. If they had tweaked this game just a tad, making it just slightly more playable and less hectic, well, it would probably be up there with one of my all-time favourite games. Now the point of the game is to collect evidence against your arch nemesis Al Capone, and to collect this evidence all you really have to do is navigate this side-scrolling platforming game until you find the goon that is carrying the piece of evidence that you're after. Now this particular aspect of the game they did make a tad easier, because if you notice at the top right of the screen you have an arrow which is pointing towards that particular bad guy who is carrying the evidence. Managing to take that sprite out, however, is a completely different kettle of fish. Not only are you totally swarmed by the regular enemy sprites, but you're lucky to get one shot off at this sort of mini boss before he just jumps to another level and you have to chase him over and over again. And does this make it a bad game? Well, no, it just makes it an incredibly difficult and frustrating game. But with a license like the Untouchables, I think they could have done so much more with this game. As I said at the beginning, I would have much preferred to see less enemy sprites attacking you during the platforming sections, and when you've reached the mini boss, I would have liked to have seen that going on to a one-on-one battle. But as with most licensed games, well, these things tended to be rushed, and I think probably that's where the downfall for this game was. But could I recommend you going out and buying it and playing it today? Well, you know what, I'm going to say yes, because yes, it's incredibly tough, and yes, it could have been a much better game, but it does have that Ocean Software quality behind it, and it's a great license from a movie that I absolutely adore. So if you get the chance, get yourself a copy of this game and give it a go. And that's the Untouchables from Ocean Software in 1989. Last up for the letter U, we're going to have Uridium from Houston in 1986, and who said the Spectrum couldn't do music? Well, mostly Commodore 64 kids with their fancy SID chips. But enough of the music, let's get on to the game, and this is back in 1986. I was the grand old age of 13 and could still play and enjoy shoot 'em ups or shmups or shooters or whatever you wanted to call them these days. And this was definitely one of the games that was on my most played list back in 1986. Working your way from Space Invaders to Galaga and on to Defender, well, this was the next step. Don't get me wrong, a lot of things are still just the same mechanics, but we can see here where developers are starting to look at 3D as an option. Now there's no real 3D in this game, but the shadows under ships and the obstacles on the screen give that sense of height that made this game just a little bit more exciting than its predecessors. And of course it helped you see what you could fly over and what you had to shoot out the way in this exciting pseudo 3D environment. And this was 8-bit gaming at its absolute finest. The graphics were superb, the gameplay was solid, and the controls were tight and responsive. It had a great sense of speed, and being able to flip your ship from forward to backwards and of course on its side to avoid some tighter obstacles. This stuff was all mind-blowing back in 1986. So yes, of course, I'm going to recommend that you get a copy of this game, get it on a ROM and emulate it, but definitely get it played, because this is a fine example of an early side-scrolling shmup, and one that everyone should definitely have a look at least once, and that is Uridium from Houston in 1986. So there you have it, my friends, that's another 5 games, another 5 8-bit masterpieces from the ZX Spectrum era. And yes, I do say that every week because to me they're all 8-bit masterpieces from the ZX Spectrum era. Now if you want to talk about any of these games, well, drop that down in the comments, because I love nothing more than the interaction between myself and you down in those comments. Tell me whether you've played these games before, whether you've never played them and would like to play them, or whether you think they should be fired into the sun and forgotten for all eternity. Well, those comments, fire them down there. Now if you've enjoyed this video today, then why don't you throw me a thumbs up, because 1, it makes a great deal of difference to the channel. 2, you know what, it makes a bit of a difference to a ZX Spectrum because it's getting some exposure on YouTube. And 3, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. If you want to see more of these videos, well, the subscription button, always there, always free, and you can always change your mind. So thank you very much for watching as always, and until next time, cheerio!